Unprecedented. We've been hearing that a lot about the crisis gripping the world today, be it climate change, COVID, conflicts, or calamities. What these crises inevitably lead to are people forced to flee their homes, face starvation, and often fight for their survival. That's where the United Nations High Commission for Refugees steps in to help ease the misery of humanity seeking refuge from the worst catastrophes. Today, these refugee hotspots include the poorest pandemic-hit nations, 8 starved Afghanistan, and conflicts in Africa. China has done its part in supporting UNHCR work that have helped tens of thousands with healthcare and shelter in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. China announced on Wednesday as well to provide more than $30 million worth of emergency supplies to Afghanistan in urgent need. I had a chance to catch up with UNHCR Chief Filippo Grandi. Here's that exclusive interview on the scope of UN humanitarian aid efforts in these troubled times, particularly in Afghanistan. First of all, the Afghan interim government has been announced. Now, from where you are and in your position, how are you going to work with this group of people?
Well, we have said it already several times. The Secretary General of the United Nations has said it. Humanitarian agencies have to engage with the Taliban. The Taliban are in control of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the theater of a very serious humanitarian crisis. The needs of the people are enormous, so we must engage. And we have already started engaging even before the proclamation of this interim authority.
Tell me more about what kind of engagement are you having?
My organization, UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Organization, is focusing a lot in Afghanistan on displaced people. These are like refugees in their own country. There are more than 4 million, 10% of the Afghan population, more than 10%, are displaced, are not in their homes. Over the years, they have been displaced by conflict, sometimes by natural disasters, sometimes to look for opportunities in big cities. And in the last few months, with the intensification of the fighting between the Taliban and the former government, this displacement has increased, and we must distribute food, relief items, shelter, medicine, everything that people need for their daily survival. But also some people have indicated that they now want to go back if the security improves to their homes, so we will help them do that as well.
So what does that mean in terms of your interaction with the Taliban and the Taliban interim government, quote unquote?
We must interact with the de facto authorities because it depends on them how we can access the people in need. We are expanding. I think the situation is progressively, hopefully stabilizing. The Taliban has to give us security, essentially. And this is the main request that we have made. However, we have also raised other important issues. We need to distribute food to everybody, food or other items, non-food items, etc., to everybody. And we need also our women colleagues to be able to work in our operations. The Taliban want to run the schools there, right? Children must go to school. Girls have to go to school as well. So we are engaging on issues that are more straightforward, if you wish, and other that are more complex. But the dialogue is active and constructive.
Who are the immediate counterpart within the so-called Afghan interim government that UNHCR has to work with?
Well, you know, this de facto interim government is very new. We only got their names last night. So it's a bit early to say, but they have maintained a Ministry of Refugees. Traditionally, they are the ones dealing with refugee matters. But a lot of the interaction now, it's at a very local level. With whoever is in charge of a particular area. That's the way humanitarians work. This is not a recognition of the government. This is not for us. This is not for humanitarian agencies. This is a political issue. But we must interact with whoever controls a town, a province, an area to access the people in need. That's the way we work all over the world.
The chain of command, traditionally speaking, for the Taliban over the past 20 years may not be necessarily that clear, particularly at local level, which means demands coming from the central level of the Taliban may not necessarily be carried out immediately by the local level. What would that mean to your people?
This is, of course, I'll speak from experience here, many years working in fragile situations. This is very typical of transition periods, of periods of political uncertainty, and chains of command break down, and the old ones, we don't know if they still exist. The new ones are not yet there. It's complex. And this is why we need to be very pragmatic, very opportunistic. Where we have an opportunity to go and bring help to people, we do it. And guess what? We're doing it already. Not just UNHCR, the World Food Program, UNICEF, the World Health Organization. There is still a big COVID problem in Afghanistan. They have shipped medical supplies from Pakistan. Pakistan has been very helpful in allowing us to bring people and goods. So it's a big effort, and we really need the help of the international community, because in these uncertain situations, operations are expensive. The Secretary General will chair a big conference next Monday, and we will call on the international community, all countries, including China, to help us in this important effort.
Tell me more about what kind of role would you like them to play?
At the moment, the biggest priority is to deliver fast, substantive aid to people in need inside Afghanistan, especially the displaced people. We need to stabilize the situation inside. There will be big issues coming up very quickly. Who pays the salaries in the schools, in the hospitals? Who allows the state to function? The big development assistance has been suspended. So those are big discussions that are coming up, and I don't have answers. It's not my responsibility other than humanitarian, but I'm telling the international community, focus quickly on those issues, because if you neglect them, the humanitarian crisis will increase, and then you have big flows of people that may get out of the country. Then we need, of course, in that situation, to help the neighboring countries receive large numbers of refugees. We haven't seen it yet, but this is something that we need to try to avoid by helping more inside Afghanistan. May I add one point? It's important also that the international community helps us pass some key messages to the de facto Taliban authorities, especially in terms of respecting people's rights, respecting women's rights, allowing girls to go to school, allowing women to work. These are important milestones that Afghanistan has gone through, and we don't want to go backwards.
Right. When we talk about the neighboring countries, we see quite a number of them have been already hosting camps for the Afghan refugees over the past years. For example, Pakistan, Iran, and Qatar, and several of the others as well. So how do you see the situation of Afghan refugees there?
I am very happy that you raised this issue, because there is so much talk about, there will be a refugee crisis in Afghanistan. Actually, the refugee crisis has been there for many years, particularly Pakistan and Iran, but also Turkey, where I am now, host large numbers of Afghan refugees. So I hope that this crisis, this willingness to help Afghans, will also apply to Afghan refugees, which has been so difficult to do in the past few years. Those countries need help to continue to host, and then let's hope that one day the situation will stabilize and people can go back. For the time being, it's still very fluid, so we need to help those countries continue to give hospitality to Afghan refugees, particularly Pakistan and Iran, because they have really made huge efforts. They're not very keen to get new ones. Let's at least help them, help those that are already in their territory. And if, of course, some people seek asylum, my plea to the neighboring countries is continue your generosity and keep borders open.
Earlier, a few weeks ago, your organization, UNHCR, issued a non-return status for Afghanistan. Now, is that still standing?
Yes. Absolutely. You know why we did that? Because in many countries in Europe, here in Turkey, but also in neighboring countries, there is some deportations of Afghans back. Afghans that are not recognized as refugees get returned to their country. And we said at the moment, the situation is so fluid in Afghanistan. Actually, we have seen the international community evacuate Afghans from the airport until 2 days ago. So we're telling everybody, but in general, every state is understanding this. For the time being, let's suspend those deportations, those returns, because it's not the right moment to do it.
But from your perspective, what should be the root causes that the international community should really focus on? And those are responsible, how they should really now try to contribute, and to the extent that they should.
Well, if you analyze the history of Afghanistan in the past half century, and you know, my organization has been deeply associated with that because of the large refugee movement, the causes that create crisis have always been two or three: fighting, combats, violence, violations of human rights, and poverty and collapse of services. So any of these cause a humanitarian problem and, as a consequence, often forced displacement. So it's important to address all of them. And of course, now, you know, after 20 years, the government that was put in place in 2001 has now gone. We have a period of uncertainty. We have a new de facto authority. Whoever is in charge of Afghanistan will have to look at these issues. We'll have to ensure that there is no violence and no conflict, that human rights are observed, otherwise we will see an exodus, particularly of urban people, and that the issue of poverty, inequality, development issues are addressed. Unless this is all done one way or the other, we will see further instability. And mine is not a political judgment. Mine is judgment based on observation of the past decades.
The Afghan interim government, the Taliban, for example, have been asking the people that are working for the government and those so-called capable with their expertise not to leave the country but serve the quote-unquote the new Afghanistan. But we also see people rushing to the Kabul International Airport, try to jump onto a flight and leave the country. So that has a lot to do with your work, because eventually some of them, most of them, ended up as refugees. Now, Mr. High Commissioner, two very different sides of Afghanistan. Which are you standing with?
Well, I do hope that Afghanistan will move towards the stability that it requires to avoid people feeling compelled to flee. That's very important. And at the moment, I think Afghans are confused, are scared, they don't know what's next. So I think the de facto government, this de facto interim government, has a big responsibility to send a message to Afghans that they are a government inclusive of all, respectful of their rights, and truly committed to their prosperity and their stability. That will be the message that will convince the Afghans not to leave. Otherwise, I'm afraid people will continue to be internally displaced, first of all, which is the biggest movement, and then refugees in other countries.
How much humanitarian assistance now is being shipped and distributed all over Afghanistan? And how are you and your colleague are going to emphasize to those countries that are now either having the G7 interior minister meeting talking about the humanitarian crisis issue, or the future UN conference on coming Monday, and those different platforms, regional platforms that are talking about humanitarian aid and support to Afghanistan?
Traditionally, funding appeals for humanitarian action inside Afghanistan have been very severely underfunded. 20%, 30% of the need. That's the situation now. So we need an immediate step up of humanitarian assistance inside the country. And a flash appeal has just been put out. The Secretary General will speak about this next Monday. I hope that there will be a generous response of donors. And the same applies for neighboring countries. Like I said, already now they need resources for the existing refugee population. There may be new refugees going, we don't know. We have just issued an appeal for $300 million for 6 months for the whole region, and we hope that that too will be generously subscribed by the international community.
China has been contributing through the South-South Cooperation Fund and other peace fund for the refugee situation and for the general development situation in Afghanistan. Your response to China's role about maintaining peace and stability, Mr. High Commissioner?
Two responses from the point of view of a humanitarian agency which is friend of China and supported by China like we are. First, we will need financial help, not just we, but all the humanitarian community and support. And then we will need China's support in conveying the key messages to the de facto Taliban authorities in terms of respect of rights, security of humanitarian operation, access, indiscriminate action, access to people in need, possibilities for women to work. We count on China and on all other influential countries to help us. That's the only way to secure that stability of Afghanistan that is in the interest of the whole world, including China.
Mr. High Commissioner, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking your time out of an extremely busy schedule right now, talking to us.
Thank you for having me on the program. Thank you.